think you might well be right, especially on the China dimension. I mean, consumption there is way lower. But, I mean, they did ask me this earlier today. Why? I mean, it seems obvious that the Chinese will invest in Europe. I mean, Europe goes down, China goes down. It's a big market, all that kind of stuff. But they're going to want serious concessions. And that's where I see a much bigger fight, right? They're going to want, I mean, you've written about this in Foreign Affairs yourself. They're going to want, you know, the family secrets, basically, for technology, for you know, defense technology, things like this, or at least serious concessions in the WTO or market access. So I don't quite see Europe giving them that either. And that's why when the head of the, I forgot, he's German, of course, of the EFSF, went to China, he said, well, I wasn't expecting anything. I was like, come on. I mean, you flew all the way to China, you weren't expecting anything. I think he was very disappointed with the answer that he got. And so we are, I mean, the G20, I'm sure, will solve it all this weekend. But, I mean, we are in a kind of, I mean, in a new phase only of this crisis, right? I mean, in that sense, back to the linearity issue, I mean, people declaring the end of the recession in what, you know, June 2009, I remember that very well. I mean, all it was 1932, I guess, or something like this. So, I mean, yeah. What is next? I guess that will be next talk. We'll have to wait and see. Are there any other questions? Yeah, we can take 5 more minutes, right? Yeah.
Hi. You've kind of talked about narrative a lot, but you haven't really unpacked it that much. And just from my own personal observation of kind of a thing that I thought of when you were doing your talk, that the technology of media became very centralized in the 20s and 30s, which helped to effectuate the creation of nationalisms. And today we have a highly decentralized media environment and a profusion of atavistic, very vaguely idealized visions of protest. And where we still have centralized communication that kind of organize like more horizontally, it's become almost postmodern and ideological camps. Like I think Fox News is the most postmodern institution in the world of just creating its own narrative and manufacturing truth. So how do we become pragmatic if we're all living within these isolated cones of information where either we can't get good information or the information we get is already spun for us? Like we don't have the distance to critically inform ourselves. It's like we're told how to think when we're given the information that we're supposed to be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I do think the powers that be, I mean, if Barack Obama wants to create a narrative, he can. I mean, he just has to go on national television and do it. The problem is, I mean, one really interesting statistic from the FT 2 days ago, 59% of Americans actually agree with the motives and what the Occupy Wall Street movement is questioning. Even more that are questioned, Americans are in favor of some kind of extra tax on the super rich. But then when they're presented with, oh, but Barack Obama has such a proposal, it's called the Buffett tax, then suddenly it plummets, the support. And in that sense, I don't know, I mean, here's this guy who was so clever. I mean, he beat Hillary Clinton, right, in the primaries. He was so clever at the grassroots, at getting out the vote, at getting people excited. Yes, we can. I mean, we remember all of it, right? And that now, somehow, he can't do this with this story. Because, I mean, if you look at the United Kingdom, David Cameron has been pretty clever, right? This whole idea, look, we could have been Greece. We're not. We did the right thing. Our coalition is on the right path. We can take this, right? And the kind of optimist tone. And he seems to, I mean, I don't think he's the most popular leader right now, but I mean, he seems to be getting some traction with this. So that still, to me, is the biggest problem of this current president. I mean, the great communicator that somehow he can't grab this and explain it for his own political advantage. I've always thought that he should have done the financial sector reform in March 2009 when the Dow Jones was at 6,000. But that, you know, it's benefit of hindsight and so what. I mean, healthcare was probably more important. But as to your question on how we can get good source, I mean, I worry about this every day. I mean, and there's probably a big gap between highly educated people that already, I mean, we all have our favorite columnists. They're the columnists that we agree with because they're really smart because we agree with them and they agree with us. I mean, there is definitely that problem. But I think when it comes down to it, I mean, in the end, the legitimacy is with the state. I mean, nobody that studies international relations will disagree with this. So if that is the ultimate legitimacy, well, then a presidential debate, I mean, there's two options, right, in this country. In Greece, there'll be two options. I mean, in that sense, you do get your information directly. In those moments of potential policy realignment, right, that's when you can choose. And I think that's when the narrative becomes much more important. I mean, I don't have the answer of what the narrative should be. I mean, I have a pretty good idea. If I were advising presidents on what they should pick on, depending on their agendas, it somehow is the case that, I don't know, the right is better organized. They actually believe in their cause. They don't always apologize for what they do, right? They're like apologizer-in-chief Obama going around the world apologizing for America. People actually believe that now. I mean, I've never really heard him go around saying, I'm really sorry for America. I mean, he doesn't do that. But somehow the right believes this. So you're right. I mean, supposedly, this great technology gives us all the information, right? But it basically makes us kind of focus much more on the information we already have or that our friends send us, and that there's so much bias there. But I still think when it comes down to the big moments when we can choose, in democracies especially, that, you know, there is a clear choice. And I think there will be one in this country. I mean, I don't know if that really answers your question, but it is a fundamental problem of getting the story across. Jessica Einhorn.
First of all, Matthias, let me just say how proud you make all of us, because we all feel as if we have some ownership in that brilliant lecture that you gave. So that was terrific. Let me ask you, if I can draw you out with all your reading and learnedness on where is our favorite economist and who could that be? I remember that after the Asian crisis, or during the Asian, you know, in the heart of it, Paul Krugman wrote about how Keynes had saved capitalism, and he said he saved capitalism because it wasn't as if anybody doubted that at the micro level, markets were great for allocating savings and giving consumer choice. But it was just that the depressions had created a sense that we don't want to go through that. We'll take anything. Does it have to be fascism? Does it have to be communism? We'll take anything rather than pay the price for markets on the macro. And along comes Keynes, and he says, I can save you the micro, but you're going to have to give up. But I can save you the macro problems, and you can hold on to your micro. The question now is, and that Krugman was posting at the time in terms of global financial crises, where is the idea about how we can keep our markets without going through financial crises? And do you find something in Rogoff and Reinhardt that you think needs to be developed more so that we have our favorite economist, a Keynes, who will say to us, you can keep your markets, but I will spare you those financial crises?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've given the answer to your own question. Keynes, I mean, of course, I am, as much as I'm a Kaleo and a Blythe student, I'm a Skidelsky student. And so Skidelsky wrote The Return of the Master in 2009. I mean, I'm sure he still stands by it. But I think we've had, and especially in the profession of macroeconomics, there's been a kind of, I mean, hyper-specialization going on. Where they've become so obsessed with beautiful mathematics. I mean, I think that's part of the story. But I think we've basically, the problem with Keynes over the last 30 years and Keynesian ideas is that we don't practice it during good times, right? I mean, Henry Farrell and his co-author in Foreign Affairs made that case for Europe. Somehow you should be able to rewrite the Maastricht Treaty to force governments to have surpluses. during good times, and then allow more flexibility on the downside. But this idea, I mean, we're all Keynesians, right and left, during downturns, but never during upturns. I mean, we've seen in many ways, we don't kind of save for when things go bad. And I think we kind of have to admit that things have to be self-fulfilling prophecies. But I mean, I think that's the big dimension of Keynes which is forgotten, is his kind of insights on financial markets, as he was a financial market participant himself. I think the fundamental mistake we made, or economists made in the 60s, was to kind of say, well, everything we've always thought is still true, but we'll have this one addendum called price stickiness, which Keynes talked about, and that basically will explain the short term. But everything else is still right. But I mean, that's then, it's a debate. Economists will say Keynes was just a correction. Political scientists read Keynes and it's like, no, this is an overhaul of everything they believed before. This is a fundamental transformation of how to look at the macroeconomy. And so I think that the fundamental insight of the fallacy of composition or the paradox of thrift, I think is true. I mean, what's individually rational is collectively suicidal, as my students have heard so often. And I think it remains true today. But I think we haven't, I mean, I teach macro. I mean, the textbooks don't do that justice anymore. The fundamental link is this in macroeconomics. It's very simple in a closed economy model. Savings equals investment. But savings go into banks, and banks lend the money. If the banks is this black box that supposedly, of course, they'll lend. But what if they're not lending? I mean, look at the Bernanke twist, right? I mean, many actually of my students say, I was like, well, why can't Obama force the banks to lend? I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. That means in a command economy, and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. I was like, because that's basically the government telling private sector what to do. So I think that's the missing dimension. I mean, Mankiw has corrected this in his new textbook, but I think it's important that you bring in the financial sector as a full actor and to try to understand this. I mean, in that sense, they are on the right track. I mean, for political scientists, we still think that they want to have the technocratic fix and all will be well. That, I mean, these things need to actually be embedded and need to be, especially in democracies, need to have some traction to work. So actually, I would tell my economist colleagues to introduce more political science and history in their teachings. That's what I would do. Anyway, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much all for coming. This was great fun from this side. And for those of you that are doing trade theory, I'll see you tomorrow at 9:45. Thank you very much.